here we go, friends. We have one more kind of big idea that we're going to take up today. So that last one was, I guess I just wanted to help us think about the adolescent brain, what's going on, and that the emotion part is just embedded so strongly. We're now going to talk about developing identity. It's a really nice match because it overlaps. And thanks to Vicki for showing us a nice illustrative example. So here's what we know about developing identity in the middle years. Kids are becoming self-aware at this age in a way. Now, it starts to happen in grade 4 and grade 5 for some kids, but at this age, it just happens. And because so many kids are becoming aware, they trigger so many other kids to be aware, which is why the note passing, texting, Snapchat, all those things that they're using. Did you notice this? Well, now they did. And so it's a really important time to think about how do we help kids as they're falling into what the literature calls role confusion, because suddenly you're letting go of who you are, but you don't know who you are. And so there's a really important part. But the thing is, it's also not to get worried when you're like, this kid seems different every day, or for 3 months, they're in a not great place. That is actually developmentally appropriate. You're trying on ways of knowing. Your job as an educator is not to freak out. It's to be there and say, how are you? What's a goal you're setting? Don't get worried about the big. Stay supporting where they're at because they need to try on different identities. There is also this piece where they need to figure out who they are in the world. And so you can call it issue-based teaching. You can call it problem-based teaching. That example I gave you was empathetic design. But if they get a chance to say, what do I think about something and what can I do, it helps them try on hats, roles, and positive identities without telling them who they need to be, which I may admit as a Germanic kid with a farm heritage and a faith-based background, I may have started my career telling kids, here's who you're going to be and I'm going to get you there. Which in the end, in hindsight, is maybe why some of them really pushed back against me, because what they needed to hear is, here's who I want to be, and me to support them to be there, versus me telling them who they needed to be. They need chances to wrestle with, you can call them essential questions or questions about the world, but we've really moved to, I love the renewed curriculum in BC so much, but giving kids the big idea is not as powerful as turning the big idea into a big question that we're exploring for the unit. Otherwise, why would you need to come to school for the next month? But you can say, what do we know about our question so far? What have we figured out? What's next? What can we do about it? And then they really get worked up in a productive way. And to try to explore things or ideas that don't have just one answer, but they have multiple perspectives, which is a beautiful connection to Indigenous ways of knowing. Whatever we're teaching, if it's something that has to do with the real world, what's a local Indigenous way of knowing that connects to that? And then what's another way of knowing? And what's another perspective that helps them explore? And so what we're really talking about and what we're playing with the rest of this session and next time is kind of developing or designing these inquiry units or issue-based units or cross real-world units that are helpful. Not that anything we're going to share you is, you maybe don't want to do it exactly like that, but sometimes it's just nice to see some examples to get your thinking going. The other little piece I wanted to hang in on is, this is James Marcia's theory of adolescent development. I taught for a few years the adolescent development course at UBC Okanagan, and Marcia is kind of like the anchor person that we're hanging out with right now. So it's kind of nice to know who's the current person. He talks about how really it's 12-ish. Do you like 12-ish? He doesn't say 12-ish, I said that. Approximately age 12 on where you're in this period of two things that are going on. They're really scary words like crisis, but it's not crisis like you think, like called the ambulance. It's that your identity is in a changing piece and it needs to have some kind of flux. So one is that you're in a period of active exploration and you're working through who to trust and who not to trust, and you need chances to work through that, everybody. You can't tell kids, here's who you trust, who you don't trust. You need to help them figure that out. The other thing is identity commitment. They're working towards figuring out who they are and where they want to go, and it's critical that we give them chances to do this. There are 4 kind of different kinds where you combine them together. One is identity diffusion, where you're just like, I don't know. Anybody meet an I don't know child this week? Well, I don't know. You're a bit passive. You're not sure what you want to do. You don't want to go because you're just kind of like a bit stuck. But you do know you need to go somewhere, you just don't know where you're going. I could start singing songs from the 70s. Do you know where you're going to? Thank you for the 3 people who laughed to that. Identity moratorium, so interesting, so important, where you're trying on lots of things, but you're not ready to commit yet. Which is why we need to create units or experiences where kids get to say, what could we do here? What's a problem that we could solve? What would an architect do for this? Real world trying on identities could be one of the most important things that we do in our classrooms. And whether it's English language arts, saying what could a character do here, but also saying, here's a real, I love teaching math with a problem in mind. I work with these teachers in the CUSP, Leslie Leach and Biz Tupper, who their grade 6-7 math is they do something in the community every week that has to do with the math that they're learning about. So they go meet that person or they go do that thing. And so we were doing circle geometry the week we were there. We all put on our snowshoes and we went outside. Some of the kids were just wearing boots. But we went around and we made the circle. And then Bez said, so what do you do if you cut across? What's that called? And one of the kids was like, you're bisecting the circle. She's like, do it. And so everybody's bisecting. What do we call the whole thing all the way around? They're like, it's the, what is it, people? Well, that's the measurement. What is this around the outside? Perimeter. Right, so you see how they're actively doing that? They're in the world. The whole focus that week was they were doing, they had to design something like a contractor. So then they're outside, they're trying it out, they're moving, they're like, now they looked at different things just around the school in the neighborhood around, so what has circles that a contractor might design? And then they came back in and they said, so what do we know about this kind of math? Because they've been doing the math all week. What are the words? How do we show that with number sentences? And then they had to create their own problem, like a contractor, using the math. No? That's trying on identities without having to commit to the identity. They're not being told to be a contractor for the rest of their lives, but you get a chance to think like a contractor in a productive way. It also makes every profession that you explore a possible positive profession. Identity foreclosure is where you pick something before exploring anything else. Right? The classic example would be like, my parents are teachers, so I'll be a teacher. We have a farm, so I'll be a farmer. Which you may very well be, but we want to give kids a chance to think about different possibilities versus kind of identity foreclosure. And then the last one is identity achievement, where there's lots of chances to explore. And you're kind of like, I do like being kind to people. I could take a turn sometimes. Or my favorite is, my special power in this class is, and you're going to have to FaceTime me in when I'm sick. Because I know I'm good at it. All right, so I'm going to pass off to Vicki now, who's going to talk a little bit around creating or working with kids in ways where they can look at real-world issues and see or feel the emotional impact, where they get chances to feel appreciated and accepted for their ideas, and within that, building or thinking about what they're doing. I won't riff too hard right now, but I will say that the literature talks about in middle years having opportunities for kids to experience exploratories or enrichment or whatever you might call that in your school, which is like trying things on for 6 weeks at a time just to try it on and have a positive experience without saying this is my option for the year. And how nice is it when we as educators get to offer something during exploratories that's our own passion. It might not have a subject area name, it just is something in the world that you could do. Card games, improvisational drama, environmental studies, or my favorite, comparing coffee shops for prices. That's not a good exploratory? Come on, people. Or bubble tea, depending on what part of the Lower Mainland you're in. So I'd like to pass off to my amazing colleague. You ready, people? Clap it out for Vicki.
Thank you. Thank you, Leighton. So I'm going to share a little bit about some work that I started a few years ago with a really good friend of mine and a good colleague, and that we got really excited about, and it really impacted and changed the things that we were doing in our class and the work we were seeing from our students. And it all started a few years ago as I was sitting on the beach reading the book Upstanders, and I was supposed to be writing report cards, but I just won this book at whatever teacher event I was at the day before, so that was way more appealing. And as I was just in the introduction, I was literally like 4 pages in, and started reading the words. And I don't know if you've had the experience, and I hope you have if you haven't, or I hope you do if you haven't, where you read something or you see something and you see yourself in those words, or you feel yourself in those words. You probably understand yourself a little bit more, or your vision or what you believe becomes a little bit more clear. And that's what I had in that moment. And this quote was part of that. But it just pieced together what I knew that I believed about teaching middle year students, about helping their social emotional learning, helping them understand themselves, and including opportunities for them to take action. But it just brought it together and made me realize even more how we needed to piece it together. And immediately I phoned my good friend Shauna, because we were going to be teaching together that year on the same team for the first time ever, so we were so excited. And I said, you have to read this book. We need to sit down. We've got to develop a unit. We've got to work together on making this really purposeful. So we actually sat through the tail end of the summer and developed this great, well, what we thought was great, what we didn't know was going to be really great, unit design for explicitly teaching our students and working with our students about understanding themselves and their identity. So as we sat down and we wanted to think about what was it that we wanted to achieve, how were we going to put together all the things that we knew that we really believed in, but make it purposeful and make it relevant and make it authentic. So what we knew was really important for us is that we were explicitly teaching and supporting our students' understanding of themselves to navigate the world that they're in and hopefully to impact the world in their own ways. And that was a big key piece for us, because we'd done a lot of work before on, students understanding more about themselves, but we hadn't been really explicit about it. So that was the next level that we were going to. We also wanted to develop our students' social emotional awareness so that they could be aware of themselves. They could communicate about that. They could understand how they were feeling and talk about it and name it and work through it, and therefore hopefully build their resilience, which, as we know, we face all the time in middle years classes where we would joke and just call it hormone soup because they're dealing with lots. So we wanted them to be able to tackle those things and know what they were tackling. And another big piece for us is that this was through our language arts classes. We were working in 4 different classes, so I taught 2 and Shauna taught the other 2. And so we wanted to set out with our goals, our reading, our writing, and our thinking goals, and embed all the explicit identity work, but in authentic and relevant ways, so that as our students were developing their reading skills, developing their writing skills, and developing their thinking skills, it was through this work of identity. And we know that they all love to think about themselves a lot. So we knew that it was going to be relevant, and we knew that it was going to be authentic at the very least. From there, a key part, and I love that you brought up that we can have the big ideas, but if they're not formed as questions, they don't mean as much. And that was a really important piece for us. This is what anchored everything. These essential questions went up, and they didn't go down for the entire year. We thought they'd be up for September and October, and we'd move on to the next unit, but they didn't. They stayed with us because they became such an important piece of what we were doing. So we had the essential questions of how is your identity formed? How does what others think about you affect how you think about yourself? And we know that our students are really thinking about that a lot. What someone's saying, or what someone's doing, or how they're looking at you, or what they're tweeting, or, well, no, they're not tweeting, what they're snapping, whatever it is. That has a big impact on how they see themselves. So we wanted them to be able to name that and notice it. We also wanted, because we knew that we were going to be building the work that we were doing through literature and through exploring media, that we wanted them to be able to see how they could learn about themselves through exploring others. And then finally, a question that we didn't know was going to take as much of an important role as it did was, when should an individual take a stand in opposition to another individual or a larger group? We hoped for that because for us, our big piece was that we wanted them to understand themselves so that they could understand their others' worldviews and be able to stand up to that. But as you'll see, they really owned it, which was a great piece. So in short, this was a few explicit months of work, but that ended up carrying on through the year. But we, together as a group in all of our classes, we started out by developing a collective understanding and definition of what we thought identity was. So the chart stand was our best friend. We had charts and maps all over our classrooms. And we really started asking them, what is identity? What does that mean when we say that? And what impacts your identity? And they charted and they charted and they charted. And of course, you know, we were shocked. Shauna and I would be running down the hall in between classes like, oh my gosh, they came up with so many more things than we even imagined, which is what happens. If we had put up what we thought they needed to know about identity, we wouldn't have got to where they did. So we understood and we developed that criteria. And once we had those charts, we then began mapping our identities. And we did that as teachers in front of our students. I sat with a chart and I mapped out who I was for the students. And I was joking earlier, but kind of that whole year ended up becoming quite a self-exploration for myself, because as the students were learning a lot about themselves through understanding their identity, we were doing the work right along with them. So things that I hadn't even thought of that make me who I am, I figured out along the way with them, which I would name and share because, you know, we were all in that learning journey. Those identity maps that we created became working documents. The students kept them in their binders and they added to them all throughout the year. And we said that from the beginning. This is something that you're going to put down now, but it's going to change and grow as you learn and understand more about yourself. And they did. They added lots. And same thing throughout the year. I kept adding to mine and Shauna kept adding to hers. We used the book, A Fish in a Tree. It was the Global Read Aloud that year, which worked out perfectly. If you haven't had a chance to read it, please do. It's a wonderful book, and we wanted to use that as the vehicle for understanding and developing their thinking. So because it's very personal identity work, they could go to certain places with it, but sometimes it's too personal. So looking at it through the lens of characters in a novel made it really accessible for them. And in the book, there's the wonderful main character, middle grades, and she's going through some a real journey of understanding herself. She's like many students that we've all experienced, who has she has dyslexia, doesn't know it at the time, but has developed all kinds of behavior challenges, or not what one might see as a challenge. She's developed all kinds of behaviors to avoid the work. And so many students, of course, could see themselves, they're like, oh yeah, I've been doing that for a while too. And then, but what it also meant is that the students who didn't find learning hard started to build empathy and understanding for that challenge of a learning experience. And when she finally named, I'll never forget, in the partway through the book, it's named that she's got dyslexia, and somebody was like, I've got that too! And it was just such a big moment because other people in the class were like, oh, okay. So it became a really important vehicle for their learning. Through that, we did character maps and identity webs for the characters. We talked about all the evidence in the text that helped them understand the identity of each of the characters. They did character mapping, and we pulled out powerful quotes that the students had to respond to and build their understanding, but also back up their thinking with evidence, which became a really important piece. We looked at videos that they brought in. We looked at images. They brought in scenarios from the playground, from their weekends, from their interactions with friends, and observations just in general from the worlds that they live in. And we analyzed them. We went back to the essential questions and dug into them. And what we noticed is that they just kept, growing and growing and growing and thinking about who they were. But the big piece was how do their actions impact those of others? And the principal of our school at that time, I'll never forget, she came into our classroom one day and said, I just had some students come into my office, and very seriously, they told me that someone on the playground was really impacting their identities with the things that they were saying. And she tried to, she dealt with it with a very straight face, but she was like, I guess this is working. But so they started to look at that world and figure out and see and be able to acknowledge what was happening, which was really important. So we did a lot of the work. We did the skill building, the reading, the writing. They were developing their thinking. They were adding evidence. They were developing opinions, and it was great. That was all the work that we wanted, the work that we wanted to do, and we wanted to help them understand self. But what we didn't know that was going to happen the way it did was about to. We did a lesson that seemed simple at the time. We didn't realize the power it was going to have. And the lesson was simple, I am not, starting with I am not. And we started it off by thinking about kids these days. And they loved digging into that topic because, they can't stand hearing, oh, kids these days. And there's so many things that they hear and experience in the world that they live in that are negative towards, labeling who they are and what they're doing. So we just posed that question. What do you hear? What do you think? What do you feel when people say kids these days? And started charting and brainstorming. And what they did is on slips of paper, they came up with statements of, I am not. This is not who I am. They crumpled them, they put them in the center of the room, we read them aloud, we went in a circle. And from there, then we came up and we said, we want you to create now statements about that are I am. Who are you? Who do you want the world to know you are? What do you want the people in this school, in your class, in your community, whoever to know about you? So they made these wonderful I am statements, and Shauna and I decided that we should put these up. We put them up in the main foyer. What we didn't realize, and we made a little sign about what we were doing, and from there it became a buzz through the school. Other classes started to create their own statements and added them to the wall and added them to the wall and added them to the wall. We had to put Je suis in there because the French immersion classes started adding theirs in. And it was really great for our students because we would walk by and they'd be standing at the bulletin board and reading their statements and reading the statements of others and seeing what was added. And it was a pretty special moment for them. They'd be like, that's mine, and that's my sister's, and that's my friend in so-and-so's class. And so they loved seeing that their work was starting to impact the school, which was wonderful. But then one day we were sitting and one of our students said, this is all really great, but we need to take this to the world. Like, everybody needs to know about their identity and how their actions impact others. So Shauna and I were like, okay, what are we going to do? So they said, we need to make shirts. We got to make t-shirts. They got to have a message. We got to walk around the school. So we went out and we got them a grant, a $2,500 grant through the BCTF. And they all designed shirts. It became a really great summative piece because everybody had to make a statement that synthesized what was really important for them for the learning that we'd done. Gave them little blank templates. From there, they decided through this wonderful voting process that they decided how it was going to all work. By this time, Shauna and I are just standing aside, letting all this wonderful happen. And we're really just sort of supporting and giving them the tools and resources that they told us they needed. So they decided on a shirt. You'll see a picture of it later. And we got all those shirts made, and so we had to wait a while, got their shirts, and everybody donned their shirts on the same day, and they took it to the streets. And they went through the community with their shirts on, and they sidewalk chalked everywhere. You couldn't get off a bus around Lansdowne Middle School without a big message that forced you to think about your actions. And they spread their word, and they wore their shirts for the rest of the year. And it started conversation. Everybody's like, what's that shirt about? Everybody's wearing this shirt. And so we'd find them in the halls, sitting there very proudly, talking about their learning and what everybody needed to know. And Shauna and I, just like I said, we sat back and thought, for us, it started off with a bit of a quote in a book and some ideas about how we were going to pull together our thinking and their learning. And we never anticipated the degree to which that they were going to take this beyond to where they did. And it was such a special opportunity to get to see our students wanting to go out, but all of it being because they knew who they were. And they really wanted to share that. And it was quite a special thing. I'm going to end in a minute with their words because it was quite powerful. But one thing I can't go away without talking about is the important piece for us as well is that we drove all this work through literature. And for us at the time and continuing, that supported literacy and literature-based learning, having that supported reading community in our classrooms and lots of access to rich text was something that we can't forget about and that we have to make sure that we have available for our students. Books are a way, like I said before, that when students are sorting through stuff and trying to understand themselves or try to understand what's going on, the books are the vehicles that allow them to experience that, it's the best self-help book out there for them and to help them understand. So I love the quote that the books are windows that they can look through and understand their world. They're sliding doors that they can walk through and experience these worlds that they might not be able to, but also a mirror so that they can understand who they are. So that was a really important piece and one that that the students really, because as you start understanding that and as they explicitly understood who they were, every book you look at and every book they read, they start understanding and seeing it more, which was important. I'm going to end with our students' words. In the end, we told them that we were going to share some of the work that they did, which was really important. And we said, what do you want people to know? Like, why was this so important to you? So they came up with a bunch of quotes that they would like, whenever we talk about it, that they want people to know of why this was so important. So here they are. I'll read them aloud just in case, but one student wrote, "When we wrote, it was about ourselves. We got to learn about each other." And another wrote that humans aren't perfect. We probably always say and do mean things, but I'm going to think about what I'm saying and think more often. I don't want to hurt someone's identity. Kids who don't know about their identity now have a way to think about. It'll help them dig deep. And I learned so much about myself. I used to be called a lot of names. I would pretend it didn't hurt, but now I'm here. I know it's okay to be me, and no one can change that. We learned stuff about each other, of course, stuff. We learned stuff about each other that we usually don't. It was a safe place. We could trust each other. And I love this middle one. I realized that I'm not alone, and that was a really important piece. I should say one of these students, Shauna and I were at the mall one day on a Pro D day, and of course the mall's by the school. So there were students there and they came up and they just started talking to us about all this stuff. And one of the students is like, I've been walking around and I'm looking at all the displays and I've learned 3 things about myself just while I've been here. We were like, that's great. But they really started to explore the world around them, which was important, and stand up and look out for each other, which was a great piece. I think that will be it. But I just want to say, I should say, that explicit piece is the piece that I can't say enough that was really important. Letting the students understand identity, helping them understand who they are, and helping them understand what they say matters, for good or bad, is essential. And they love doing it at middle years. So thank you very much. Oh.
Okay, friends, sorry to interrupt your conversations, which in your 100 sites may have lasted for about 67 seconds. But we're coming to the end of our time together. Yay, Team Victoria, for coming and being in the photos. Yay! And everyone was really excited to sit in the middle of the room in the center of the photos. It was great just to be together to have this conversation. The vision of this series really is to have a conversation about middle, to celebrate what we do. Because unless you're in middle, it's really hard to imagine how we multitask. And we're constantly with our kids, being with our kids, modeling and nurturing and supportive. And sometimes it's just nice to step out and say, what is going on for them in their bodies and their brains? And how do I support and nurture that? But also to recognize the importance we have in terms of we are supporting the use of that brain plasticity in really important ways. And so we're not holding time till secondary. We're actually helping them build pathways that they'll continue to use over time. And they are at a time, I don't want to call it a risky time, but I'll call it a risky time, which is identity crisis needs to happen. It's developmental. And so we need to create these supportive spaces, not where kids travel to see 8 different teachers, but to actually have 2, maybe 3 teachers, but 2 in particular or 1 that are their mentor. And so that we're creating these safe spaces for getting to know yourself, learning how to be with others, and doing some really cool deep learning where they can ask questions and figure out some of what they know. And did I mention how great they are at actually synthesis, which is what was the big idea? What did we learn? And then it just becomes a school-wide project that turns into a t-shirt and becomes something you take on the streets. Our next session is February 19th. We're at a different school. We're traveling to a different middle school each time. And in those other sessions for folks in SD61, there'll be a lesson study during the day for that group of folks. So if you want to be with me in the classroom, we'll actually try something out in the classroom that relates to that theme. And then we'll have the after-school session from the same time. Next time we're talking about self-regulated learning and varied and ongoing assessment. Thank you ahead to Monica, who's already committed to giving me an example about some gorgeous assessment work that she's doing in Surrey. And then also we're going to pick up more on what Vicki did this time. I'm going to look at a couple other examples around developing challenging, exploratory, integrated curriculum that's relevant for kids, that takes bigger chunks of time, but it has a real payoff. And it's just really nice to think about what could that look like to help you design it in a way, because the payoff is huge, but getting into it can sometimes be a little bit daunting in terms of what we do. And then our last session, you might know Shelley Moore, and if you don't, you'll know her after session 3. And so we'll look at valuing and embracing diversity in the middle years, learning and teaching in multiple ways, and then we'll close with a couple of highlights around things that have come up from the questions from the sessions that will pop in that little section around, like a few little takeaways that are like, here are some things that we really thought were important from the series. Thank you, Team Middle. Hashtag something something. Hashtag. Thanks, Tammy. Engaging my MY for middle years learners. Yay, team. Go forth and find little moments to breathe. And also remember that you can't keep creating peaks all day through the day for middle years learners. You got to pick an anchor thing and then have some of those calmer things that build into those anchor things. Thanks, everybody.